to keep on trucking. Last year sucking, midget chucking, slap the puckin'. How much wood could a woodchuck chucking? Merry fucking Christmas!
Merry Matrix and a Heilig New Year. Are you going deeper into a bottomless sea of blue light specials? Are you drowning in guest lists, being killed by 1,000 Christmas card cuts, gaining weight so you'll later be slaughtered by some guilt god from the heaven of mirrors? Is there nothing more important than your yearly bonus? Santa massaging your genitals with a new iPad? Or a New Year's resolution that will buy you more time as your credit cards buy you more ruin? Is your ego the reason for the season? If you answer, "What the frack?" to any of these, you might be gaining the gingerbread world and losing your soul during the holiday season.
All our holidays are always such a mess.
Oh, yeah.
How did you get through it?
I had a lot of help from Jack Daniels.
But at least it's good for the children, right? I mean, not the tens of thousands of children who die of starvation and disease every day. Don't worry about those, or the homeless man outside who just looks better covered in snow. No, worry about the children getting the new Assassin's Creed game, or emo Barbie that cuts herself at the sound of the Killers. And drown any lingering worries with some Mariah Carey Christmas tunes, or by watching the Lethal Weapon Kwanzaa special.
Get the homeless glory, ra 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 ra.
Just say, "What the frack?" again, and enjoy the holiday season. The materialism, the fake greetings, the lusting over cousins or some step milf, the stress, the slow road down into cosmic ignorance.
One day, somebody's going to have to make a stand. One day, somebody's going to have to say enough.
That's the spirit. The Gnostics never ran off to the desert or the mountain tops or the Irish pubs like other religions. No, the Gnostics always face head-on the sirens and sphinxes of society throughout history. And we must face the holiday season, even if it cements shoes to our divine spark, threatening to sink us into the bays of forgetfulness.
Thanks for turning my holiday into a Woody Allen special.
But what can we do, regardless of what happens or how it feels? You'll shoot your third eye out, kid, our teachers and parents tell us. The holiday season is one of Jehovah's Chinese finger traps. Or as Philip K. Dick wrote, to fight the empires to be infected by its derangement. Whoever defeats the empire becomes the empire. It proliferates like a virus. Thereby it becomes its enemies.
Inside the Matrix, they are everyone, and they are no one.
Last week, I said the answer is to go inward, to the domains of the imagination, art, creation, the collective unconscious, that stillness and rest from the secret book of John, that movement and meditation of the Gospel of Tommy, that light-filled quietness Mary Magdalene witnesses in the Gospel of Mary when she rises to the eternal realm. There we will find the means to dissolve the empire and its Festivus poles, for our divine sparks are larger and older than creation itself. Like Carl Jung once wrote, we have not understood yet that the discovery of the unconscious means an enormous spiritual task, which must be accomplished if we wish to preserve our civilization.
To say yes to one instant is to say yes to all of existence.
and an enormous spiritual task is why you come to Aeon Bite Gnostic Radio, broadcast from the virtual Alexandria through the GodAboveGod.com. Welcome with kindness and love, my beloved truth seekers. Welcome to the machine and the means to escape it. Welcome to that dream of you, that ship smoke on the horizon. Welcome to your divinity and your devilry, and expect a good interior struggle as you battle the hordes of hell on the fields of the true seeker warrior. After all, if the kingdom of heaven is within you, so is the kingdom of hell. If the kingdom of the Father is spread all around, so is the kingdom of the archons.
It's hard to find the moral high ground when we're all standing in the mud.
Aeon Bite might be not for you, though. If you believe most of civilization is colluding to violate Christmas like a Penn State coach, this show may not be your frequency of paranoia, unless I get a slot on Fox News or something.
I will let you partake of rich, succulent Sarah Palin.
If you like desecrating holiday displays in between World of Warcraft sessions in your mother's basement, because all religion is evil, you might want to tune out and occupy Richard Dawkins' latrine. If you're a New Ager who believes all is one and all should think as you when everyone realizes they're one, that peace on earth is around the corner if we would just adjust the vibrations of our vegan chakras. But then come January 1st, you're laying off people and sexually harassing the janitor. Please turn your browser to some other show. Maybe a Wiccan podcast hosted by an overweight, nose-pierced, snake-tattooed witch.
We have found the witch, may we burn her?
Most of all, if you believe spiritual growth is easy and not a hero's charge, please leave and get ready to be recycled for aeons in some simian form or whatever the Hades the demiurge fashions on other planets.
Smite me, almighty smiter!
For the rest of you, champion Eternals who have chosen to bring down the Empire and preserve civilization, again, welcome to Aeon Bite Gnostic Radio. Welcome you Gnostics, lovers of the esoterica, and Dionysian freethinkers. You know what we are, baby. We're the lords of deconstruction, the revenge of the myth, and the word made unflesh. We are astro creeps, and we are modern-day Tom Sawyers. We are kings of pain, with our little black spots on the sun today. And that spot is our dense compassion for all who suffer by Samael's psychic solar farts. We are the seed of Seth, the knights of Hagia Sophia, and the assassins of illusion. We're ready for a singasm, the sacrosanct solitude of the profane, and the red suppository of gnosis.
Anonymity is your name. Silence your native tongue. You are no longer part of the system. You are above the system, over it, beyond it.
I am Abraxas, in his mortal incarnation of Miguel Connor, broadcasting from the frigid dystopia of Chicago on this December 10th, the year of our demiurge 2011, patiently awaiting for the beginning of the world as usual. I am that voice in the cyber wilderness crying out for your indwelling dark night and indwelling bar below. And maybe Barbarella, if you've got the figure.
You sit on a throne of lies.
If hell had a spokesperson, I would carry her teleprompter. If Zeus caught an STD, which I'm sure he has, I'd be his antibiotic shot. If Aphrodite came out against Herman Cain because of sexual harassment, I would be her lawyer. If Atlas dropped a log and destroyed the UN headquarters, the Skywalker Ranch with Lucas in it, or the set of 2.5 Men with all the cast members present, well, I'm not gonna clean it up, but I'll write a blog post giving my approval.
Okay, good luck with the slow descent into madness. We're gonna go now.
In this eternal now, we return to the ecumenical discipline of alchemy. We are joined by my friend, colleague, and sparring partner, Jordan Stratford, author of Living Gnosticism and his new work that is very unique, insightful, and long overdue, a dictionary of Western alchemy.
It's like God's vagina.
Jordan has graced the virtual Alexandria thrice to discuss his book Living Gnosticism, Johannite Gnosticism, and Sophia herself. Check them out at our store because they are Viagra for the soul. Jordan is also a documentary director, screenwriter, and priest for the Apostolic Johannite Church. He's a jack of all trades, while I continue to be a jack of all offs.
This is bullshit. I'm not listening to this. You are insane.
No, you're insane. And we simply do not have time for this crap.
For more information on Jordan, visit jordanstratford.com. From our shows on alchemy with Tobias Churton and Al Sylvester, as well as other guests, we know that alchemy is one of the most venerated esoteric arts. It's poetry in motion. Yes, she blinded me with alchemy.
If you have something to say, right now is the perfect time to keep it to yourself.
It cuts across all religions and ideologies. Both the Orthodox and Heterodox have sought its arcane gifts, whether it's lead to gold or holistic medicine, or to make steampunk shows like Full Metal Alchemists. But we finally have a tome that categorizes the sapience of the alchemists in Western culture, a gathering of important terms, from ancient Egypt to Jungian Psychology. Beyond just a dictionary of alchemy, Jordan's book reveals the various scientific and mystic tributaries it has influenced for thousands of years. In our oral intercourse, we'll learn about the origins and evolution of alchemy, and why it's still very important for spiritual liberation in a modern world. We'll study it from all angles and traditions that include Christianity, Islam, the Occult, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and even Harry Potter. We leave no philosopher's stone unturned, and we'll get closer to escaping Jehovah's Chinese finger trap once and for all.
Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
Jordan articulates this better, but I think the truth about alchemy is that its magic is no magic at all. You see, once upon a time, humans honored or supplicated the gods whenever they did anything. Hunt, build, copulate, fight the lizard people. It didn't matter. They knew they were tenants in a world of fickle landlords.
Sometimes the gods bless you in the morning and curse you in the afternoon.
Even with Christianity, like Salieri and Amadeus, or Tim Tebow with the Broncos, any task or work or deed commenced with the invocation of Jehovah.
If he didn't want me to praise him with music, why implant the desire and then deny me the talent?
So in a sense, almost everything they did was holy. Even if tasks failed, people reflected on themselves and the cosmos, and learned something, and matured. We may think of this as rather superstitious, and it might be, but it made humans much more humble, focused, and grounded in the present. Think of the movie The Last Samurai, where Tom Cruise is impressed how the Japanese take every action or chore no matter how mundane, very seriously and very methodically. It's that sense of being in the moment and part of the cadence of fate that paradoxically made the Japanese more honorable, patient, and mystical than the gringos.
What we do in life echoes in eternity.
I know a lot of people who have practiced alchemy, from Orthodox Jews to Theosophists. Sometimes they did expect supernatural results, but the important part was being nothing more and nothing less than God in their experiments, or becoming God, or just knowing you can touch the presence of God. And like I keep saying, imagination and creativity is what will give us the mind of Christ and allow the circuitry of our brain to harmonize with the circuitry of the alien God's mind that is often known as the pleroma. And then we shall be truly free, and especially free to feed those starving children out there and that homeless man covered in snow.
I know we're all pretty small in the big scheme of things, and I suppose the most you can hope for is to make some kind of difference. But what kind of difference have I made? What in the world is better because of me?
We've certainly lost that reverence here in the West. We are all about results and goals and eventual trips to the Bahamas. Well, those who have jobs not shipped to the East by the establishment. Kinda ironic considering my speech about The Last Samurai. Anywho, we want easily put together Target cabinets and quick gourmet microwave dinners. And wonder why in the West we've misplaced our honor, our humility, and much of our benign pride. And that has given us a gold-to-lead mentality and the philosopher's turd as rewards.
Every passing day, we are taking one step closer to a dictatorship. And we don't even know who the real dictators are.
Think about it, because I've done more thinking than usual. I need to go watch some Thunder the Barbarian episodes to recharge me noodle. I won't even bother with my usual support Aeon Byte speech. But, please, support Aeon Byte any way you can. Your support is essential. So enough of my drivel. Jordan Stratford discussing his new book, A Dictionary of Western Alchemy, and mucho más.
You know, during this joyous season, it is easy to forget the true meaning of Christmas. What Christmas is really about is the birth of the cute little baby who would grow up to die an unbelievably horrible death for our sins.
This is the Aeon Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by my friend Jordan Stratford to discuss his new book, A Dictionary of Western Alchemy. How are you doing, Jordan? And are you ready to talk about something other than, I don't know, sports, girls, and the usual stuff we talk about?
Yes, because that conversation we were having about monster truck rallies is what really typifies our communication.
Usually. Boys will be boys.
How about that local sports team?
Yeah, exactly.
We'll set that past us and move on to something a little more esoteric.
Yeah, I'm afraid that's the theme of the show. That's what they're looking for. So tell us about the process and reasoning behind you bringing to life A Dictionary of Western Alchemy. Of course, we all want to hear that you saw a great light, and maybe, Terry Gilliam's, God said, you must write this, Jordan. Was that how it was?
Yeah, pretty much, actually, except for all the things that you said. It was exactly like that, except no, it was like so many of these, so many such things. It was dark and it was dusty and it was kind of moldy. And there's a scene in the Lord of the Rings movies. I can't remember which of the 87 hours of filming, but Gandalf rides off into the White City and he's in the archives and pulling off all these dusty scrolls, and he's reading till his eyes bleed. And it was really a lot more like that whole process than any kind of sudden epiphany. For me, the impetus for engaging with Gnostic texts was Jung, and we can talk about him and blame him for all kinds of things at length in the interview. But I was looking through these scans of source materials that in the early 90s, even before the web, on various news groups, that individual researchers and librarians were putting early JPEG scans, just flatbed scans, of original manuscripts from libraries all around the world and putting them throwing them up to the internet in a very sort of random and uncatalogued, haphazard fashion. And this stuff is quite fascinating. And so I started engaging with this imagery in the late 80s, early 90s. I was just taking notes. I would come across a term that was unfamiliar to me, and I would just write it down either in a little Moleskine notebook or I would write it in a little text file on my computer. And then later I'd see a symbol and I would associate it with that term and I would connect those two. And then I'd look up the etymology. And just by taking notes through observations, on text by text basis, I started to, this kind of cellular structure started to emerge. And it allowed me to orient my thinking and orient my analysis. But the first whole process of it was just kind of data gathering and data collection. And I wasn't even really taking these notes for any other reason except for my own sense of, I think I'm going to come across this again, and what is that, and look that up later. And after the process of, after the period of 20 years of doing this with one test at a time, and no real defined arc, I realized I had about 300 of these things. And then I started to do it in earnest and started to organize and alphabetize these. And I ended up having over 500 alchemical terms and biographical sketches and over 200 symbols and illustrations.
And in your book, Jordan, you write that, quote, "This is not a book about alchemy. It is a work of alchemy." What do you mean by that? That
the whole process itself is one of transformation. This is not a critical analysis of alchemy or the study of alchemy as a worldview. This is an actual chunk or an apparatus in the alchemical laboratory of the individual researcher. So just as you would say, here's a beaker, and this beaker isn't about alchemy, this beaker is part of alchemy. It's a tool in the lab. But the dictionary is a tool in the lab. And while the emphasis of alchemy is usually taken to relate to things that are in the experiential universe or within the material world, my bias as a Jungian and as a reader is about extracting meaning, extracting tools and imagery, symbolism that inspire the imagination, that pique the curiosity, that engage or promote lines of inquiry for personal work, for spiritual work, for dream work, for creative work, for interpretive work. And so in that laboratory of the alchemical imagination, this dictionary becomes part of that apparatus.
So basically you're saying that you, like the medieval alchemists, were transformed by just simply writing this book.
Absolutely, and it's certainly my intention that the reader is as well, to a degree, because it equips you for your own path of alchemical exploration.
For listeners that might not be that familiar with alchemy, could you tell us about alchemy and why it's different than chemistry, perhaps its origins?
Well, the word alchemy comes from an Arabic term, which is a loan term from ancient Egyptian, and the chem in alchemy is the ancient Egyptian word for black, and ultimately the word for Egypt itself. The idea is that if you take a shovel and you turn over the soil, if it's black, you can plant something there and it will grow and you won't starve to death, and this is a good place to be. But if you turn over the shovel and the dirt is red, and you plant something there, it's not going to grow and you're going to starve to death. So chem means that is black, but specifically the fertile soil, the rich, nourishing soil of the Nile Delta that then became the two kingdoms, Upper and Lower Egypt. But it also speaks to the natural philosophy of Egyptian civilization and the core assumption that God was in the machine, that there was an X factor, that within nature and natural process, there is meaning, and that through the observation and participation of natural processes on an external level, that we can figure out how to internalize these same processes and thereby attain and extract meaning. So we can really be cracking this stuff open for proof of the existence of God and for the proof of our relationship with God through the experiential universe, which is not to say that the experiential universe or that nature is God, but simply says that by this observation, by looking at these processes, we can see similarities in the objective or the external world and find similarities with our internal experience and thereby derive meaning. So what's the difference between this and chemistry? Honestly, not a whole lot. Certainly, chemistry is the modern term and the modern discipline for what we always refer to as alchemical practice. There's not a hard and fast line between chemistry and alchemy unless we do a little bit of historical revisionism and we superimpose this division between alchemy and chemistry. But Francis Bacon, who is widely credited with being the father of the scientific method, was a 13th century friar, was an alchemist. Sir Isaac Newton was an alchemist and was very careful to so self-identify.
And we can say with certainty that alchemy did begin in ancient Egypt in the West, right?
I think that what we can do is say, by the time that we come across this term, that the people that were talking about it, and we certainly find early Ptolemaic scholars that are writing down chemical formula and chemical processes. It was very important for them to associate their particular studies with the inspiration of ancient Egypt. So whether they had it right or they had it wrong, this was, when they organized this as a field of study, this was a very important touchstone for them to make that association. So we don't know that that alchemy was something that was done by ancient Egyptian priests, but rather when we get into the classical period, the scholars who were picking this stuff up subscribed to that as a narrative. So we don't know if it happened for real, but we know that it was important for them to think so.
And another thing that's hotly debated by many occultists and scholars, whether alchemy began as a spiritual practice, because some say no, it just began as another form of science. And then later on, towards the medieval times, maybe the classic period, the sort of spiritual dimension was added. What is your view on this, Jordan?
I think that's a really interesting one, and because of course there's no objectively right answer. What you can argue is that it is a post-Enlightenment view of civilization that things are either scientific or that they are spiritual. I think you put these things in context and you see that it's an artificial dichotomy to say that these things are either scientific or spiritual. The purpose of science, the purpose of knowing anything about anything, whether it's to move a rock or to refine a metal, that these things are divine in their origin and in their practice. And that when you're living a sacred life, it's this kind of ora et labora, prayer and work model that says you make things sacred by doing them, that understanding in itself is a sacred task. There's not a hard line between looking at the stars for dating purposes, which is to say, not not in an eHarmony kind of way, but looking at the stars to say, when are we going to plant this, and when are we going to harvest this, and when are these things going to line up? But there's a very solid reason why temples were also built along the lines of the stellar progressions, because it connected human knowing and human experience with divinity and with so knowing the material world, knowing the clockwork of the universe was important to understand the self and society and the divine. So it's not like these things are just applied chemistry and then there's some mumbo jumbo bolted onto them later on. And I think that's going to be a pretty hard historic argument to make. More likely, we have a worldview where there's a seamless garment that has aspects of what we would consider to be industrial chemistry or applied science, applied physics and physical dynamics, and spirituality and spiritual understanding. That the reason why X happens, the reason why that this chemical interacts with this chemical or these two substances do a little dance together is because God is making this happen, that these things have been set in motion through a kind of a Platonist divine template. And we can access the divine template by mucking around with the tinker toy versions that we have available to us here in the experiential universe. There's definitely a God and a machine aspect to this. And I mean, I think so much of it does come from Plato in our Western understanding of it.
Yeah, I do remember there was one time, and I believe it was one of your polemics against Dawkins, and you said it very well. You said both science and the occult exist to bring what is unknown to the known, very Gospel of Thomas. So, in a sense, they go hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that this kind of brings up the point of why even look at alchemy in the 21st century at all. And I think that the alchemical worldview, that there is an X factor at play, that there is some kind of, you can call it the divine, you can call it the ghost in the machine, but that there is a moving knowing that is inherent within the experiential universe. Now, you can obviously say it's there because it thinks the experiential universe is just a wonderful place to hang out, which is one view. And then there's another view which says it's here because it's trapped in there. And that happens to be my view, but that's more of a personal thing. But the idea is the guiding principle of science for a very long time is that things had meaning. And whether you want to call that the divine or God or the ghost in the machine, I still think we're ultimately talking about the nature and existence of meaning. And the current scientific debate seems to have been temporarily hijacked by a movement of absolute nihilistic materialism that says things are infinitely reducible and there is simply a meaningless mechanic at the root of all experience. And alchemy says, not so fast. Let's not be so quick to jettison the role of meaning in science and the role of meaning in knowing. And certainly the quest for meaning is something we can go through Joseph Campbell or Eliade or Jung and see how important it is, the quest for meaning and the distillation of meaning, the extraction of meaning is to our daily lives and to human experience.
Obviously, you come from a background of Gnosticism. What is the proof that we have that the Gnostics worked with alchemy? After all, if you look at the Nag Hammadi library, well, you're not going to find it. Even the Hermetic text, it's kind of like, well, where is it? How do we know that the Gnostics practice alchemy? Because it's almost a given.
I mean, formally, we don't have a specific Gnostic text which we would associate with. First off, that everybody's going to agree this is hard and fast as a Gnostic text, and then secondarily that says, and this has alchemical components. Again, going back to Jung saw the alchemists as the bridge between Gnosticism and his own work. So these things are distinct entities, but they are also phasic aspects of one contiguous phenomenon. Certainly, we can see that the alchemical worldview is reflected in Gnosticism, particularly the Valentinians. The Valentinians were really big on this idea that the material world was instructive and that you can take it apart and the God is hiding in there somewhere. And which is why you have these very rich and lovely natural metaphors within Valentinian literature that say that by going through these material experiences of birth, of the rushing of crops and childbirth and marriage, etc., that the divine is in there. On the Thomasine side, obviously you have the splitting of wood and the lifting of rock, and that Jesus is saying that he's inside all this stuff. Again, it's important to say that he's not saying he is the wood or he is the stone. He's saying he's in there. And so this idea that creation is a vehicle or a vessel for the divine, not necessarily consubstantial with the divine, not necessarily equivalent to the divine, but that God is in there, that is hiding in there, and that this presence of the divine is ubiquitous. If only we can engage in the right way with the experiential universe. That is a profoundly present term and idea within Gnostic literature.
And don't we also have the Emerald Tablets by Hermes Trismegistos, translated by Newton?
Well,
or is that kind of iffy too?
What does it mean? I think that it establishes, the entire Hermetic worldview is often summarized from the Golden Tablet as above, so below. And this simply is a restatement of that Kemetic, of that Egyptian worldview that says the processors and the experiences of objective reality are subject to certain forces, and those forces likewise fashion human experience, and not just our material selves, but also our divine selves. So that there is spiritual insight and psychological insight, well, I certainly didn't call it that, but certain insights to be gained from a knowledge and familiarity and study of natural philosophy.
And Jordan, what was your criterion of collecting alchemical terms, or which ones would end up in your book? And what were some of the terms that might have surprised you and might surprise the readers?
Certainly, when you get into some of the later medieval texts, you're definitely working with a literary genre that is encrypted, and it's encrypted for very specific reasons. And this is the protection of intellectual property. And this is really kind of interesting because it really humanizes these alchemists. They're not just these gray-robed sages that are looking for the advancement in the universal medicine for the betterment of all of humanity. These guys are also looking essentially to pay the rent. As I said, it makes them very approachable and it humanizes them. They'll figure out a way to pass cotton along as silk. This is something that you can Google now in seconds, but before, this could actually make somebody's career. And it could also, the most important thing for these guys in a lot of cases is that it gave them a lab, and it gave them isolation and time to study and to work on their experiments. So there's a real world component. And so they're protecting this intellectual property, and they're doing this through obfuscation and through degrees of remove. So there'll be a symbol or an expression like the old man. And the old man will then be represented by a hook shape. And then that hook shape, which is sort of the bent over spine, actually means a specific compound, or perhaps a process you can do to a specific set of compounds. By these infinitely regressive layers of remove, you have these wonderful, very private obfuscations by individual authors. And sometimes they are completely inscrutable. Sometimes somebody will get so far down as you have no idea as to what they're talking about. There also exists a strata of commonality and common experience where one particular school of alchemists will be using a specific set of terms or processes, and these things ultimately start to normalize. So this idea of the phases of decomposition and then purification, ultimately refinement or even enlightenment or enthusiasm that ends up happening with these specific compounds, whether you're turning base metals into something more refined or you're looking for something medical. There's still this idea that things kind of go through the black phase, they go through the white phase, they go through the red phase, or sometimes there's the yellow phase in the middle. But this becomes a kind of a norm for the description of experiences. So the ones that make it in the book are the ones that you're most likely to find that conform to a certain kind of at least an approach. There's a tremendous amount of variety, text to text. And again, the main purpose of these texts were not to communicate, but to obfuscate. These were personal notes that were encrypted by their authors. In many cases, they were published posthumously and published without the knowledge or the intent of the author. As you go later on, you find that some of these authors are publishing specifically for notoriety. So I'm going to go and produce this thing and this document that seems like complete lunacy, but I'm going to give you a nod and a wink and say, oh, but it's all in code and the wise can confront. And I'm the published author of this book, and aren't I terribly clever? That's obviously this happens today. You go to any motel conference room and there's a guy in the front who's basically saying the same thing, and the books are in the back, and you sign them after the speech. So you start to see that as the impact of media and printing play its role in there. So that's why this thing is so fascinating on so many levels. As a lover of history, as a lover of media, as a lover of language, there's just this wonderful interplay, depending on when you pick these things up and when they were written or when they were published, when they were translated and how they were translated. These different strata of documents tell their own unique and fascinating stories.
What I liked about your book, Jordan, is you also leave open a room for skepticism for the listener, saying, maybe a lot of this is just bunk and a lot of these people were just con artists.
Well, no doubt, as in any human endeavor, a lot of it was bunk and a lot of them were con artists. That's the human experience. And these guys could have been making soap, and the same thing would have been true. I think that there are really four conclusions that we can draw just when I walk through it logically, and this is just from my own pondering. We can sort of start with the best case scenario and then narrow it down. And the first is that when we talk about alchemy generally, in the romantic sense of turning lead into gold, or creating a universal medicine, or curing all diseases, or the philosopher's stone and immortality, we can go and say that's what alchemy means. And it worked. These guys in the late Middle Ages were cranking this stuff out. It worked for them. It still works now, and somebody knows how to do it, but that somebody is not me. That's really kind of the first thing that I have to go for. So we can start from there, that there is this very specific magic, not a general magic, but a very specific, if you do this formula and you know how to do it correctly, that you can do all these things that are attributed in a very fabulous way to the alchemists. The second is that we can say is that it worked for them, but it doesn't work for us. So the rules have been changed somehow, that there was a mechanism, a moving force to which the alchemists were subject, and we are no longer subject to that same influence. So it did work, but it doesn't work now. The third thing is that we can go and say, well, it never worked, but the alchemists were naive. So these guys are boiling their own urine for years, and they're dissecting frogs in order to make X happen. And they're spending their time there in their sobbing failures, going, "What am I doing wrong? I keep trying this. There's got to be another way." And they're just racking their brains out for decades trying to make this stuff work, and it just is never going to work for them. The fourth is we can say the whole thing was a con. It never worked. They knew it wasn't going to work. And they're simply putting all of these distractions out in the meantime because they're running some sort of con. Or they had some legitimate chemical processes over which they understood, and this could be anything from ormolu, or making a specific medicine, or making gunpowder. And so they had this kind of industrial chemistry business on the side, and the rest was all smoke and mirrors. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. Go look over there at the weird things we're doing with the frogs in the jars. I don't think that at any point we have enough evidence to look at any individual and say, aha, you were definitely this. We do have some really interesting stories. We have Flamel. We have Nicolas Flamel and his lovely wife Perronel, who they cranked out a lot of gold. I mean, he was a scribe. He was a secretary. His day job was writing letters for people who were illiterate, making copies of documents, legal documents, lands and deeds, titles, this sort of thing. He was basically like a freelance writer. And then at some point, he starts to manufacture very significant quantities of gold, or he starts to obtain significant quantities of gold. But the point is that this guy did not have a lot of money, and then suddenly he did. And he was founding hospitals and churches and all manner of good public works all over medieval Paris. So, if the whole thing was a con for personal gain, he was very, very bad at it. He was very good at the first part. Obviously, he had no real talent as a con man because he didn't benefit from it personally, and everybody else did. So, when you look at that, you say, what do we do with that? So we also have people like Hollandus who pretty much, as an experiment, makes a tiny bit of gold from what he called a crumb of the Philosopher's Stone and said, I guess this works, and never really did anything with it after that. So we do know that something happened that either produced gold or produced something that convinced assayers at the time that this was gold. So I'm not ready to completely discredit any kind of physical phenomenon, but there's all I know as someone who undertakes philosophical and spiritual work is that I can't do it. And even if I could do it, that this would really kind of open up a whole can of worms ethically. But there are some things that I can do with this information. There are ways that I can engage with this material. And this is through my own work as a writer, as a priest. And I look at the parallels between the Eucharist and transubstantiation, the idea of turning base metals into something which is precious and refined, and seeing this as a metaphor for what Jung called individuation, or the maturation of the human spirit. And by understanding the processes and by being sympathetic to the suffering and the condition of others around me, I get an understanding of myself by observing natural phenomena, just by being connected with season, by being connected with the phases of the moon. I see how this affects my own temperament, and I look at the times through and the seasons of my life, of when I'm reaping and when I'm sowing. So philosophically and in this abstract sense, I personally find tremendous reward and tremendous nourishment by engaging with this very scriptural discipline.
And Jordan, could you maybe talk about some of the luminaries in alchemy? I think a lot of people would be very surprised at some of the real giants that practice it. You mentioned Newton and Bacon. Can you talk about some of the others?
You're looking at somebody like Elias Ashmole, who was one of the most famous Freemasons and of the 17th century, and he's often associated as any history of Freemasonry is going to look at Ashmole, and it was Ashmole's bibliomania and his bibliophilia that became one of the cornerstones of library science into the 18th and 19th centuries. We've got, and of course, Bacon, who was the polymath in the 13th century. Cagliostro, who's of the late 18th century, who's sort of an Italian philanthropist. He was definitely a forger, but he was imprisoned to the notorious affair of the necklace involving Marie Antoinette. But here was a guy who obviously started out as by running a con, but through his researches became a doctor, became a physician, and was then offering free clinics. And he lived in Russia and ran a free clinic in Russia for many years, ran free clinics in France, was imprisoned in the UK. And I mean, he was somebody who, while starting out on the wrong side of the street, absolutely transformed his life into a path of generosity and service. So Cagliostro is just a wonderful story. Flamel, a lot of people know because he comes up in Harry Potter.
Yes, he does.
And he's a 14th century alchemist, and like I said, he was just a scribe. He was a secretary. He was certain texts that he had found and translated to create a substance that then had the ability to manufacture gold. I mean, there's we can't say there's any direct evidence that he manufactured gold, but there's certainly evidence that he had no funds, and then he had great funds, great amounts of funds that he used to build schools and hospitals and churches. He was a very pious man. And I had the fortune of being in the Musée Cluny in Paris. And the Cluny is this wonderful attic. If something falls off Notre Dame Cathedral and they can't bolt it back on, they stick it in the Cluny. So it's got all of the odd little bits and pieces. And here's a chunk of a statue that they brought back from the Napoleonic expedition. And there's nowhere else to put it, and it goes in the Cluny. So it's the great it's the junk drawer of Parisian museums. There, in this wonderful cavern in the museum, is the tombstone of Flamel, and it was missing for a very long time. After he died, everyone thought that he had a spell book or the Philosopher's Stone secreted in his house. And so literally mobs came and they tore the place to bits. Everybody was looking under the floorboards for whatever magic wand he used to generate his money. And then even for centuries, his tombstone went missing because it was assumed that his tombstone had some kind of alchemical code on it. And then actually showed up in somebody's kitchen. They'd been using it as a cutting board for about 200 years and flipped it over and found this inscription that was his actual tombstone. But the inscription on it was simply pious. Yet there's the sun and the moon, but it's simply a little testament of the resurrection and of the day of judgment. So even at the end of this man making the equivalent of millions or tens of millions of dollars from very humble origins, he still chose to be remembered as a pious Catholic gentleman. Probably my favorite of this cast of characters is Jabir, who is the Arabic father of alchemy in the 8th century. And he was a genius. He was a polymath. He was an engineer. He created, he didn't create, obviously, but he discovered and cataloged tartaric acid, hydrochloric acid, citric acid. He developed aqua regia so he could dissolve gold. He wrote the first draft of the periodic table. And this is all in the 8th century.
Wow.
But because of his encryption of his lab notes, they were rendered indecipherable by those who would follow for a very long time. And it is from Jabir that we get the word gibberish. And so,
kind of like Paracelsus, we get the word bombastic. Another alchemist.
Yeah, and Paracelsus, of course, is really the father of modern medicine. So, again, I think this simply exposes that our idea that alchemy is over here and that real science or legitimate science is over there. This is a post-Enlightenment superimposition on history. We have to go through it and we have to pretend things are other than as they are in order for this to resolve into itself.
Another two that people overlook, we're talking two of the great fathers of modern Catholicism, is St. Thomas Aquinas and Alberto Magus. They were alchemists too, right?
Well, absolutely. Albertus Magnus was the patron and doctor of the church, who was also the mentor for Thomas Aquinas. The alchemical text that we have extant that is attributed to Albertus Magnus is unlikely, is probably pseudo-epigraphical. He probably did not actually write that text, but he had such a reputation that it is likely that he produced something. And again, this idea of the use of reason and the use of very calculated and deliberate, what we call scientific observation, that having a place in spiritual pursuit. I mean, that's Aquinas in a nutshell. That we have been given this intellect, we have been given certain natural laws, natural forces, and by our understanding of these, by our engagement of these, by our analysis and contemplation of these, this intellectual pursuit is a kind of spiritual refinement, that there is meaning at the end of this. And that's why I think Aquinas is is such a gift to the Western mind. I put him on the same the same kind of pedestal that I would put Plato, and then of course Newton, for a lot of the same reasons.
And we can't forget John Dee, who was one of the influences on Elizabeth I in creating one of the great empires in history.
In fact, the idea of a British empire was his. So Dee was, a very, very curious character, fascinating character. But again, the idea that the universe is a kind of a decipherable clockwork, that the universe is trying to tell us something, and that if we can figure out exactly how all the stuff is going to line up, that we can benefit from this, not just materially, but psychologically and spiritually as well. I mean, there's a really interesting relationship. I'd love to see a Dee movie. I mean, I think that the guy is just born for the big screen. There's a possible association between Dee and Shakespeare. That Shakespeare may have been a spy for Dee. Dee was absolutely a spy. He was the spy master for the court. But he spent a lot of his time with an associate of his, Ned Kelly, looking at a black slate of glass and talking to angels. He was doing a lot of the things which now would get you certified as nuts quickly. But
I think you and I don't even need that.
But he had money and power and political influence, and so and a lot of things which in different geographies and different eras would have had him executed for witchcraft. But for him, he was a man of science, and he figured that anything that other people had claimed to have experienced, if it had any validity at all, could be analyzed and categorized and could be understood through a scientific lens. And that was also a very Thomist view of the world as well.
And I probably should have asked you or mentioned this at the beginning of the interview, but is this the only dictionary we have of Western alchemy?
This is the only in-print dictionary of Western alchemy. After the second day, I think I mentioned to the bookstore that's hosting my book launch that I was the author of the best-selling alchemical dictionary in the world.
Not a lie.
because I bet that's true. Yeah, there have been other attempts at alchemical dictionaries. The last one was about 20 years ago that had less than 200 entries, and it was more of an encyclopedia. This is definitely these are very short entries. I have quick biographical sketches just to orient the reader with the body of the primary source texts. I'm only dealing with primary source texts. Often there's a kind of what I call alchemyology, which is not so much not so much alchemical study as the study of alchemy. So you'll see these texts which are literary criticisms or historical criticisms, and specifically, I'm just working with primary source texts so that you can pick this stuff up, and if you get lost or if you see there's a mention of a toad, you can look up toad. If you see you want to know what the yellow phase is, or you see the symbol for volatility, that you can go, okay, where is that? Have a quick flip through the book. Okay, volatile. This thing is going to blow up. Oh, why do we say something is volatile? Because it comes from the Latin volare, which means to fly. And it's going to fly at you. So the idea is that it's a quick check that can get you back into the text as quickly as possible.
And of course, somebody's going to ask, why just Western alchemy? Since there's obviously a rich tradition in the East of alchemy.
Absolutely, and I had some pressure to call this a dictionary of alchemy, and I insisted on keeping the Western there because there is this tremendously rich tradition within Chinese alchemy alone, or what one we call Middle Eastern alchemy. Certainly, just the Persian tradition for it to stand on its own, and I'm simply not qualified to write that book. So everything that I was doing, all the material that I was working from, are all Western sources. So these are texts which are written in Latin or Greek, late Middle English, variations of French, German. So things that I actually had a chance at deciphering. But even then, because so many of these were written in an era before any kind of standardization, even in many cases Latin standardization, that we see a lot of bastardized Latin used in alchemical source texts.
And lastly, let's say I want to learn alchemy. I will have a dictionary of Western alchemy probably on top of my dictionary of Gnosticism. What books on alchemy would you recommend for somebody who's interested in alchemy as a starting point?
Well, I wrote this book as a starting point because whether you are picking up rose gardening or Thai cooking, there's this knot of verbiage that you need to address. And you're going to get bogged down quite quickly with all this terminology. And so if you have just a quick tool to navigate through the terminology, the introduction of my book is there to orient the reader to frame alchemical source texts in their proper light. The attempt of this book was to create a starting point or a ground zero for someone engaging in alchemical study. Having said that, there's an excellent book for those who want to look at practical alchemy, which is called Real Alchemy. It's by Robert Allen Bartlett. It is still in print. Came out about 2006. And it's a very good primer on simple alchemical processes that you can do in your kitchen that will actually help you orient yourself with a lot of what these medieval alchemists were doing. So you can actually try a lot of this stuff without blowing yourself up.
All right, Jordan, well, I think that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing your new book, Dictionary of Western Alchemy.
I would just say that the book is by Quest Books. Certainly the book is on sale now on Amazon, and it can be ordered at questbooks.net. And anybody wants to find out more about the rest of the stuff that I'm doing or follow my blog, everything is available at jordanstratford.com.
Well, there you have it, listeners. It's all there, and I definitely highly recommend it. Again, thank you very much, Jordan, and hopefully we'll talk to you soon.
Always a pleasure to be on the show.
And there you have it, my beloved truth seekers. Jordan Stratford giving us the chemistry of alchemy from his new book, A Dictionary of Western Alchemy. Again, for more information on Jordan, please visit jordanstratford.com. And as you can see by the A-list of people who were elevated by alchemy, from Thomas Aquinas to Isaac Newton, this tradition is much more than Harry Potter fodder. Alchemy has certainly changed history for the better. If you're into the occult, a dictionary of Western alchemy should be by your desk or in that basement you keep those college students trapped for your next human centipede experiment. With Andrew Phillips Smith's A Dictionary of Gnosticism, the Occult is the limit, my beloved truth seekers. And hopefully we'll soon get a dictionary of stupid remarks at Aeon Byte, or maybe a dictionary of New Age that will have blank pages, because we're all one consciousness, so who needs to think, or read, or learn, or mature, or work hard, or fight the good fight, or obtain gnosis, or travel the dimensions, or quick! Someone fist me with a Bill Hicks monologue before I go and turn on the Oprah network. That was close. Orthodoxy and New Age oxy. Twin breasts of the demiurge's wife in the secret book of John. A nasty bitch named Agnoia or Ignorance, who wants us to drink her sour milk of individuality poisoning. Other than that, not much else. Well, I wouldn't go that far. For those of you who don't know, Mrs. Abraxas will soon be having a little rooster for our household, and it will be during the holiday season, perhaps even Christmas Day, our little Jesus or little Mithras. When that happens, Aeon Bite will go on hiatus for a few weeks, since I couldn't get Ron Perlman or Arsenio Hall to cover. But worry not, because I'll make sure you've got some rebroadcasts that will blow your spiritual uterus away. And we've got some horror show guests lined up in 2012. So yes, my third mortal child I bring into this world of Maya. Exactly what the ancient Gnostics wouldn't want. More slaves for Yaldabaoth. Well, maybe if Sophia threw down a condom once in a while in between all that gnosis, something there would be a little less of that other kind of alchemy. But it doesn't matter. I will love this child with all my heart until the stars in the sky go dark. I have gained one more divine spark to fight for. I have yet another ally in the revolution of the spirit and mind, in the name of Hypatia of Alexandria. And so do you. Divided we stand, together we rise. That includes you too, little Abraxas. I am Abraxas, broadcasting at the virtual Alexandria through the God above God.com. The road is ended, the alchemy experiment is over, and so the song is over. Thought I'd have something more to say, but don't cultivate any troubles, my beloved true seekers, because like heaven above you, the spy that loved you, I'm keeping all of your secrets safe with me tonight. Hello and goodbye as always.